and we are back with another DM Tavern, and I'm super excited because I finally got somebody to co-host with me. I want to take a quick second to introduce somebody you already know. He is the bold, the beautiful, stereotypical Strider, and tonight he's going to be co-hosting this DM Tavern with me. So I'm going to let him introduce himself first, plug some stuff, and then he's going to take it from there.
As Chelsea said, I am the bold, the beautiful, stereotypical Strider here again. This time not running a game or a algebra channel. This time I am running DM Tavern with my good girl Chelsea, DM Night Hag here. Very excited to be here. Just going to plug my channel real quick. I run live plays on it and also other videos for descriptions, preparations, encounter philosophy, stuff like that. I also like to plug the Tabletop One-Shot group, also known as the OSG. Great place to go meet some new friends, play some good games. That being said, I'll go ahead and pass it on to whoever wants to go next. Hello, me?
Y'all are geeks.
Wonderful, awkward silence.
First up for introduction, we have Chepe, another good friend of mine who also shares twin powers with me and needs some special love.
Hello, I am the not so wonderful, not so bold, not so beautiful, quiet as Strider. Chepe Pepe. My channel is Trodden. All things niche, surrealist, dream fiction, biopunk, steampunk, any other kind of punk mix that you can think of. That's the channel. A bunch of weird stuff. Check it out if you like. If not, that's okay too. It's mostly for people who like to check out different kinds of games and things like that. Do a bunch of community stuff and all that jazz. And I like to pick on Night Hag because she complains that I was supposed to co-host something and I was not aware that I was supposed to co-host something. So that's the joke, and that's why there's the back and forth.
Can we hear from Sam? Because I haven't seen Sam since the Snake Color game, and I'm very excited to see him again.
Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this, and thanks for doing this on a weekday at 8:30, because I can't make it Sundays at 5 or whenever it used to be. No, thank you. Yeah, my name's Sam. I run the YouTube channel Chalice and Chains. I'm the guy who posts up all kinds of crazy ideas in the OSG saying, hey, wouldn't this be fun to play? And some of them we actually play, so that's fun. And yeah, if you guys haven't checked out that Snake Color game over on Stereotypical Strider's channel, got to check it out. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome, awesome. We also have somebody who has come to every single DM Tavern thus far, and he is the apple of my eye, Laser Tomahawks. Why don't you introduce yourself, Anthony?
Hello again. Laser Tomahawks is named in a previous tavern, DM Tavern. I think it was explaining impromptu plots using the infamous dice. Currently, I've just started a new session of campaign with my local group using some miniatures as well, which went very well with the local geek group because they could bust out their own miniatures. I also got to bust out my unicorn mask and freak them out, so that was all that good. And just had a game with Chris earlier today. He killed me with a shotgun. I'm not forgiving him. That's all that's happened with me lately.
Awesome, awesome. It's always great to have you here because you literally make my day when you bring up Laser Tomahawks. So we have an interesting line overlay happening over here. Let's introduce the DM Unreasonable Impromptu Improv Master Extraordinaire.
Well, I didn't add the extraordinaire part, but if you insist, shit, I will take the moniker. I'm Christopher Manning. I am DM Unreasonable on the page Unreasonably Reasonable, where I post atheist content and D&D content. And this Monday, I'll be posting my first live play of a 13-session campaign that I'll be running, and it'll be a good time, hopefully. And I'm here just to talk DMing and have a good time.
Awesome, awesome. And now we have our personal grumpy cat Lumi. Why don't you actually introduce yourself this time?
All right, I'm Lumi Joe, and just before we get started, I'm experiencing technical difficulties right now, so I apologize if I cut out completely.
You're good so
Am
far.
I at least partially audible?
Good, good, good.
Okay. Yeah, I run basically just the channel Lumi Joe. I have a couple of one-shots. I've got a campaign in progress that's kind of on hiatus right now. But I don't really do anything but the live plays, but I'm looking to do more of those. So that's about it.
Awesome, awesome. So, as usual, sometimes people come in later, sometimes people leave. It's free form. If you want to join at any point in time and there's space in, you can go to the event page on the OSG and come on in. This is open to anybody who wants to talk. New DMs, old DMs, veteran DMs, whoever wants to talk can come talk. But the first thing I want to do to kick this night off is to kind of tell you guys what we want to kind of focus on tonight, and that's prepping, descriptions, and one-shot pacing specifically. And for this, we're going to turn it right over to my co-host, Stereotypical Strider, so he can kick the ball and get it rolling.
So to start with, guys, whenever I go to make a description for my game, right, when I'm in there doing the preparations and I'm doing the typing, I have a rule I like to go by. And that rule is essentially that I never want my actual speaking to go over more than 30 seconds to 1 minute of time. And the reason I do this is because when I'm doing the descriptions, I don't want to take too much of the spotlight and too much of the ideas, right, away from the players. I want to keep it brief, I want to keep it simple, and I want to just throw the ball back to them so that way they can go wild with it. So the question I have for you guys right now is, like, when you guys are doing your descriptions and everything, do you guys go and kind of like put any kind of limits on your descriptions? Do you just go all the way? Do you just like write whole pages or just little bits here and there? How exactly do you guys go about setting up and doing your descriptions when you're prepping for your games?
Well, since I run two types of games, the first type is usually a pretty well thought out, pretty well planned game, and that's going to be an example of that would be the campaign I'll be starting to run this Monday. And the other type are on the spot, not practiced, unrehearsed games. There are two ways I'll go about this. Either A, it'll come down, and I'll have a very vague idea of what I want pre-planned, and I will drop maybe 2 or 3 sentences of description, and then I'll allow my players to try to, feel their way around the environment, ask questions, and then I will mold the description based off of what they are either seeking, looking for, or what they expect to see. Now, with the improv games, those are often, if I could come up with 2 or 3 good sentences of on the spot, like, you're like earlier today, Anthony was in one of my games. He got shotgunned to death. He were in a dive bar. I described it as being dingy and dirty when you walked in, with people playing pool in the corner, and someone was reading a newspaper in the back, and the barman, he eyed them when they walked in. Well, I walked in, and nothing super. I'm not trying to be Stephen King or whatever. I'm just trying to let the players understand the situation they're in, and if they require more context, they can ask for it.
I actually, not so much as a method to madness, but I guess a personal experience. I find when I'm a player in a game that I cling better to visionary descriptions, like less about what would be specifics and more about how a room feels. I find that it sticks in my brain a lot better, that as we're doing a scene inside of a room, say there's a bar fight going on, I start losing a lot of descriptors and forgetting where things are unless the DM has given me some kind of visual cue to lock onto. Not so much with like actual images, but with descriptions. Basically, I guess my add-on to the question would be, when you're writing out your descriptions, do you guys find that like writing out paragraph length descriptions kind of hinders your players? Like, you find them maybe asking you a lot more questions, kind of needing reminders as you go? Or do you find that your impromptu kind of descriptors kind of seem to go over well in you guys' experience? If anybody's either done both or one or the other, what have you noticed?
I tend to do much more of the improv style, and I mean, I don't know. I guess I would put it out there to maybe Marquise and Josh, because they've both played in a couple of my games. To sort of answer that for me, but I tend to not write out a lot of description. If I write out any description, it will be either bullet points, or maybe I might write out like a paragraph as an introduction. But I tend to write just basically, okay, if you're in, a tavern, I'm going to write you're in a tavern, and then I'm just going to go on, off the fly. And what I tend to try to do is ask my players for descriptions. And if you and I would recommend that to anybody. If you have a player that will roll with it, just throw it to them. Okay, you walk into the tavern. Will you tell me what you see? That's a cool opportunity. So I try to do that as much as I can.
I really like that.
Yeah, I think that that lends a lot of player agency that you don't see a lot of DMs giving out to people. Of course, you would require players who know what they're doing with it. Someone might find that level of freedom to be daunting. They see, oh, I can do that? Oh, man, what do I say?
Well, there's two types of players. There's a player like in a player specific setting and not a DM. There's a player like Strider who can improv at the drop of a hat, any situation and be dropped in it. And then there's a player like me who likes to be kind of second or third down the line, so I have a minute to tinker in my head with what I want to do. Because if somebody puts me on the spot right off the bat intro scene, I am just lost. I can't do it. I struggle with that so bad, and every time I play in a game, I try to make sure to tell the DM, please don't make me go first because I won't have it.
And there's quite a few players who kind of like that, who they want to take a second to be able to get their thoughts straight, to kind of work through what they're going to be going through in their head and everything. So that being said, we have a couple new faces in here real quick, especially I like to get their opinions on it. So starting with you, Josh. When you're getting ready for your games and you're prepping for your games and everything, do you like to write everything out? Do you like to do impromptu? And your example, what have you found is best for you as a DM?
I mean, it varies a lot from game to game, but mostly I write down some minute details, or minute details that I want to make sure I include, but I don't typically take scripted notes. By any means, and usually notes about scenery and stuff like that, and it'll usually be just maybe one or two words, and then just 3 or 4 one or two word things describing perhaps a type of plant life that's around in the area or something like that I want to make sure to just setting dressing stuff really. As far as actual storyline stuff goes, I try to give my players a lot of freedom, and so I don't get too in-depth on my notes about enemies or anything like that, because the way I tend to run my games, there could be a multitude of scenarios that they could encounter, the encounters, quote-unquote, that I've set up for the session. So I try to save those descriptions for, the place where the PCs naturally came upon it, sort of deal. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I see what you're saying. That kind of brings up another thing when you mentioned sometimes, as you called it, setting dressings and everything, where basically, you just put the small things in there. But kind of going with that tangent is a concept that I think a lot of us are probably familiar with, the Chekhov's gun, where essentially you never really want to introduce something unless you think it might have some specific use or you plan to use it in the storyline. And I know my good man here, Chepe Le Pepe, the Niche King, is actually very skilled with the whole Chekhov's gun concept, always introducing things that could have a lot of relevance. So Chepe, when you're doing your descriptions and everything, do you go out of your way to always add those things in, or you try to leave it more nebulous recently? What do you think is best?
Best is kind of a bullshit term in this kind of field, because you have different GM styles and different people. like it's hard not to. How do I put this? Like, it's the same with like different writing styles with different authors, right? It's the same with different gaming styles. You're not going to find certain ways of describing things are not going to resonate with certain people. It's the same with writing. It's the same with communication. It's the same with fucking video games. How much more tabletop RPGs? But as for what I do a mixture of a lot of things. I've done videos on it. It was one of my first videos. I made a few buzzwords for it. I probably regret doing that, but basically I do only include things that I think players can directly interact with in descriptions, or generally expand upon things that either may have relevance later or are important to the world. And generally I try to incorporate the canon of the world itself into the plot of the game, I guess you could say, into the encounters, into what's going on. The example of which I normally give is if you're in a fire, you can describe how hot everything is, you can describe the burning, or you could describe the smoke coming in out the windows, which means the windows are a possible escape route. You can notify that the door is hot, that there is rubble coming out on the other side, indicating that there is no way to go through that. You could say that there's kitchen sinks or a bathroom that is open. Like, laying those details, which lay out possibilities for players, are generally better, because that means players are more likely to look out in the description in order to find things that they can actually interact with it. Because the information is inherently useful, because you're giving them things that they can use to either solve problems, benefit their character, or work with. That being said, a lot of it is improv. Like, you can take things halfway through a session. Let's say a character drops something on the ground. That can become a Chekhov's gun if you know what you're doing, especially if you have an internal consistency of the world itself. Let's say a player drops a stick of gum on the street when they're walking into the middle of town. That might have something to do with something, that might not cause anything. If you think about it, could that cause anything, and if so, how? Sometimes that gum, there may be a littering law, and perhaps an altercation with an NPC that happened behind them that they had no idea what that was about was actually from the gum that they dropped. And later the NPC comes back and has a grudge against the player because of that incident, and there's a whole situation that ensues from that. That's, again, how I run things, and how I tend to run things is a lot of behind-the-scenes shit it's really overcomplicated for some GMs, so take that as much as it's worth.
No, I mean that makes a lot of sense. In fact, I think the more usable a description is, the better it is for your players. The more things like that a player can think, oh, well, that's important. That I can utilize. That'll help them latch on to a description. Things like saying you walk into the bar and there's a bar there. You know, there's literally a bar. You can go behind it. That's potential cover in a firefight, you know? Oh, you've got two windows on either side of this door. Well, if the door gets locked, someone might want to have to escape. Windows are a thing. Things like that definitely help. Because not only are they things that a player can utilize during the game, and you can utilize as a DM, of course, there are things that will always stay there in the back of your character's minds, even if you're not planning on using them, and they help set the place you're in. They help give it a level of realism. They concrete it for your characters.
Well, so I have a question then. To take it sort of off of what Chris was saying, you know, do you guys ever intentionally keep it somewhat vague so that you will see what your characters come up with or what they do?
Yes.
Because sometimes what I find is that I'll have a picture in my mind of what the scene looks like, but I don't necessarily want to share that because I want to see, or I don't want to share that in great detail. I want to see what the players will come up with. And that's where I kind of go back to what I said before, you know, well, why don't you tell me a little bit about what that looks like, or what do you imagine, you know, this looks like? Because what I find is that they'll say stuff or they'll do stuff that you didn't necessarily plan for or anticipate, but then that adds a whole level of detail that you can then, you know, riff.
Well, absolutely. I think the key is keeping it vague. If you define it too much, well, you can pigeonhole yourself. You know, if you outright say, "Oh, you're in the bar. There's no pool table," when the player wants to say, "I grab a pool cue and smack it upside this guy's head," well, you say, "Oh, well, I'm sorry. I would let you do that, but I've already said there's no pool table." Whereas you say there's a bar and you don't say whether or not there's a pool table or not. It's up to the players to decide. Oh, well, okay. Well, I'm in a bar. Well, it's in a bar. Billiards. I'm about to smack this fool with a pool cue.
I agree with that. And the specific technique that I like to use when I'm doing my descriptions and everything is I'll describe certain things in a lot of detail, and I'll kind of present the overall scene, right? Like I'll describe the general gist of the bar, but then I'll purposely go out of my way to leave certain things, not mentioned. Like I won't say if there's a pool table or not. I won't say if there's someone smoking at the bar or not, or eating peanuts, unless it's something, as Chepe said earlier, something I want them to specifically interact with. So that way, much like kind of like how Sam said, I can let the players come up with stuff on their own and stuff that I can further improv and use to add more depth to the game, if that makes sense.
So yeah, I think the main reason that I go into like the minute details about certain things is I try to run my games from the aspect of it's important once the players make it important. So by describing setting dressing things, they're things that I want the players to have the potential to interact with, but that they don't necessarily have to. However, if they decide to, and the way in which they even decide to interact with certain objects will determine whether it's important. And oftentimes, when I'm running my games, the way they decide to interact with something will determine the way in which it's important as well. Which is why I tend to do, at least for me, fairly minimal notes and that sort of stuff, because I want to provide an interesting game for the players based on the things that they find interesting.
Which I agree, wholeheartedly with the concept of basically throwing things out there for the players in case they just want to make something like that point, in case they want to, utilize something like that description. But that being said, Rex, Lumi, and Anthony, like I know you three also, all you guys run games and everything, so how exactly do you guys go about your descriptions and everything when you're prepping for games?
Well, in my case, I have a little bit more of a difficult time because I have a writing disability, so I do everything on improv. I do like basically writer's bubble of like basically I ask my players what their character background is, and then from that I pretty much formulate the story from there and potential protagonist background story. I also like using the system that Michael Pondsmith came up with in Cyberpunk, which is called a lifeline, where you can pretty much have your character roll up from basically a certain age to current, and then based upon their roles, certain events will occur in their life, which will potentially feed me more information that I can then inject into the story. Like 1 year they read into a lover, or 1 year they had good fortune, or they crossed or made an enemy, and then I wind up trying to throw that in the game. And generally, I just basically find out what my players are playing, what their backgrounds are, and then formulate the story from there. And then basically I improv the entire thing. And then at the end of the game, I usually tell someone, write down the minutes, which is basically the synapses of the thing to keep canon in check. And then I build upon the next story on the next improv section.
See, I actually really like that because that's actually one thing I don't see a lot of DMs doing, and that's asking for player background ahead of time to build off of.
That is one of the most important things, I think, and it's very hard to get that in a one-shot just because, I mean, first off, from a player perspective, you don't want to have to sit down, write up your character, and then write up some detailed-ass background for a character you might only play with 1, 2, 3 times at most. And only those people who actively enjoy doing that are going to do that for you. And that's one of the reasons why I love D&D 5th Edition's flaw personality feature system. It kind of gives you that inbuilt in there just a little bit. But, I mean, for campaigns and stuff, that is one of those important tools a DM could ever ask for is a background, something to draw from. Sadly, due to the structure of a one shot, I feel like it's actually easier to put out a one shot's pitch and the concept you want to rock with, and then have the characters build their characters around that, hopefully making their backgrounds fit that pitch.
I actually made a video about this. It was the last video I posted up before the marriage hiatus. I actually kind of disagree with you a little bit on this. The video was basically about making a character and not a character sheet, and how even in a one-shot, I mean, you always have a primer, you always have some kind of idea of the world you're going in because it's piqued your interest to join that game. That or you trust the DM enough to roll with whatever he's going to throw at you. But one of the things I always do, and you can ask Strider about it, if he's rolling a one-shot, I'm like, where am I? What's going on? Because, you know, I don't want him to tell me what's going to happen in the game, but I want to know the area that I'm going into. I want to know what my character has been looking at for the past 2 weeks as they traveled into this area, because I want to make a character that fits that world and feels organic. And I said this in the video, and I guess I'll say it again, I find a more rewarding experience with a character that is fleshed out in a one-shot or a campaign, because I can focus more on role-playing in the moment and less on, is my character a good person when it comes to this subject, or are they not? Because I've already kind of figured out who they are in my head. It's not that I devote an absorbent amount of time to character creation for one-shots. It's probably an hour-and-a-half process. I do hold a lot of my my character sheets back to reuse again, changing them slightly to fit into worlds better. But as far as that person's mannerisms and nuances, how they feel about subjects going on in the world. Like, for example, in Kondwania, there's a south kind of faction and a northern kind of faction, and Lugal there are slaves, and how does my character feel about slave situations and stuff like that. It basically revolves around just having an idea of that world and how your character feels about it. And kind of as I said before, I find a more rewarding experience because you're focused on your story and not your decision making when it comes to almost alignment type issues.
And
I completely agree.
Go ahead.
Would you like to finish?
No, I was going to say, I actually think that both of you are actually completely correct on what you're saying here, and that really the biggest thing that matters here is both the theme of the game that the DM is trying to go for and the player itself, if that makes sense. Because these things really are dependent on how experienced the player is, how experienced the DM is, and how fleshed out the world is. For example, in Lumi's campaign that I'm currently in, he kind of did a mixture here. He gave us a bit of a background for us to use, and then he also told us a lot about the world, so that way we could also kind of make our own connections, come up with our own concepts. It's kind of something that I think Lumi did really well, so if Lumi, if you would like to, if you could kind of describe kind of like how you went about that for like the whole preparation for the character creation process and kind of like how you guided us in creating our characters, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, me too, because I think Lumi did a really good job when he gave us so much player agency during character creation.
Well, I mean, for Stratum, what ended up happening was I opened up with only one stipulation for the players, which was this campaign is going to be about, it's going to have a lot of exploration in it, so be prepared to spend a lot of time on your own. And that was really the only limitation. I wasn't going to restrict anybody's character, but, they needed to accept the fact that, maybe the politician who, deals with all of their problems by manipulating, social circles, probably not the best character for this. But, that was all on their own. And from there, they would come to me with a character concept, and I love talking. I'm a massive narcissist. I love talking about my game, so I ended up just having this wonderful back and forth with whatever player wanted to come to me about their character. And slowly, I mean, to me, character creation, if you want like a big story-driven group, which is not always the case, but if you do, it's a really long-term process. It's a lot of just talking it out, letting things fall loose, and eventually, me as the DM, I'll get plenty of ideas. I'll get moments I want to have happen. I've got a moment that I want between a player in my home game, and something from his backstory that I'm like trying to figure out how to do it right now. I'm like, I want an awesome fight on a lighthouse in a thunderstorm. How do I do that? Again, I have point B and I need to get from point A there. So it's all about I wouldn't say it's about preparation. It's just talk it out with your players and see what falls loose, because you will find what works. You will settle into that groove if you work it out long enough. And that's kind of how I prepped for that.
Okay. I think that's an absolutely wonderful way of doing it. For the campaign I've got coming up, I made a group on Facebook. It's going to be over the internet, obviously. I made a group on Facebook, friended all the guys who are going to be in it, put them all in the group, and I gave them an overview of what the world is like. I gave them a brief history. I gave them an idea of what the religions in the world are like. I gave them an idea of the place that each race holds. It's a kind of a low magic setting, so I've put restriction on races and classes that have a lot of magic. And with that, I asked them, all right, guys, this is the hook. This is the setting. Where do you guys want to fall in? And at that point, I gave them all the agency in the world they wanted. One guy wanted to be famous. He's famous. One guy wanted to be a special ops soldier for the big faction you guys are part of. He's a fucking special ops soldier. One person wants to be an assassin of sorts, and I'm like, yeah, you know what? And I can't go too deep into that because it's some stuff that I can't let the other players know about. Nothing like nothing terrible. Like this character's not going to go stabby or anything, but I mean, I talked to him about it, and I figured, this sounds really interesting. What you want here sounds like an awesome story, and then the next thing I did was I asked each one of them, all right, this is a campaign. This is going to last 13 sessions. I don't want flat characters who aren't going to react to what's going on around them. I asked them all, what direction do you guys want to take your characters in? How is your character going to change in response to the world around them? What character arc do you want to fulfill? And going forward with that in mind, I think is going to be very helpful, not only for them in role-playing, but for me. It allows me to build an entire story based on solely how these characters are going to change. And I think that's really one of the best parts of the role-playing game, is that actually absolutely what excuse me. Absolutely what DM Nighthag was saying when she said that you're the most fulfilled you are is when you're fulfilling a character's wants and needs, as opposed to thinking, oh, what would my character do here? You're more, instead of thinking of the character, you're thinking as the character.
Exactly. It's all about becoming the character as far as the player stance go. But from a DM stance on that note, seeing your players become a character and not just playing as them is equally rewarding, because you can play off of that just as much as they do.
Absolutely. And that's what I'm hoping for anyway. I remember one of the most fulfilling one-shots I ever had was a real simple one. It was like, you're storming a castle, you're killing a corrupt king, and I made a background where my character, his family was murdered by these king's henchmen. And my entire concept was like, all right, I'm gonna find and I'm gonna murder this fucking king. And I did. I eventually actually managed to do it, and it was probably the most fun I had ever had. I didn't fight. Yeah. I'm a terrible person. I know. I'm going to hell. I'm sorry.
Stop F-bombing, mister!
He said it again!
They're everywhere. There are just bombs dropping all over the place. I'm dropping 100 kiloton load on you guys. I'm so sorry. It's just who I am. That's like what I said. I am DM unreasonable after all. And just the most fun I ever had I wasn't fighting a vampire. I didn't slay a dragon. It was a king with some knights, but it was one of the most memorable times I've ever had at a table. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and these memorable moments are very important. And I also believe it's a big responsibility of the DM as he's running the game, especially for a one shot, to kind of make sure you can kind of produce these moments. I know Charlton Chains here, Mr. Sam himself, he runs a lot of Fate one shots, right? And Fate is a system very focused in on character creation, character development, character presentation, and everything. And so, like, I know Sam has a lot of experience with this, and my good man Josh here as well. So he's been running a very long campaign. I've seen a number of his one shots and everything. So, like, for you, in your opinion, Josh, when you're prepping these campaigns and you're prepping these one shots, and you want to focus on the characters, how exactly do you, Josh, kind of go around? How exactly do you set it up? How exactly do you prepare it so that way you can ensure that the characters are able to properly kind of fulfill what they want and kind of come out on their own, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, for me, that's just taking notes. Like, that's, I guess, the biggest part of prep for me is taking notes about my player characters. And I'm constantly looking for, most of the time, I guess the campaign, quote unquote, that I was running, the War of the Gods, I tried to make sure that there were things that each of the characters that could possibly be in that session were going to be able to interact with it, were meaningful to that character, based on sort of the locale or the relic or whatever that they happen to be hunting for that particular week. So I mean, that's, I think, really the biggest part of prep for me is just taking notes about the characters and taking notes about I constantly take notes about what my players do in the sessions, because even if they've set up a character's backstory one way, characters evolve and players may end up playing them a different way than they initially thought they were going to. So I constantly take notes about what players are doing in the sessions, and the things that I can tell that they're picking up on and interested in, so that I can try to include more of those aspects for those players in the future.
And on the topic of taking notes about your characters and everything so you can prepare for that, I know that Juve here, Rex, mentioned earlier that he kind of does the same thing with the minutes and everything. So when you're preparing for a game, Rex, do you kind of do like a similar that Josh just said, or do you do something else with it?
Well, usually before game, I find out what the players are. I figure out what their backgrounds is, and I literally sit there for about 5 minutes and create the story in my head. So I wind up basically creating a movie. So I do things like the opening scene, like how they come off their into the scene. I come up with how they interact with all the characters around. The last one I did was I decided I wanted to do a Western Werewolf Apocalypse World of Darkness game. And I also decided that I wanted to cover 2 subjects, but done tastefully. Xenophobia and racism in a game in which the characters, it wasn't the main focus, it was an underlying like culture piece in the post-Confederacy setup. And the way I did it, that was the concept, and I just went with it. And I did have the overtones in it, but it added to making the characters more engaged in their games. So, I mean, that was just one method I used.
Which I think is a very skillful method, and I really like how you kind of explain it there. And I know Chepe, when he's going through preparing through a game and everything, he does something kind of similar. So Chepe, when you are going and you're preparing a game, because you're very skillful at impromptu games, kind of just pulling a game out of nowhere, and you want to see if the players can be satisfied and everything. Do you do anything special to make sure the players are satisfied in character creation, or when you're telling them about everything? Or do you just kind of wing it? How exactly do you go about kind of ensuring that players are able to get satisfied and the expectations done?
Typically, okay, so for me, that is something I think I'm personally weaker on. But what I try to do is this: I try to be as honest about what I do, like whatever the concept of the game is, up front. So hopefully the buy-in is there by the pitch of the game, right? So like your satisfaction is hopefully X thing that I'm already doing. For example, if I'm doing like a dramatic intrigue of some variety or an extremely hard intrigue that with no pigeonholing, me not focusing on anything, totally hands-off game of intrigue, where you could end up dying by saying the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time. And that's what people are about, and that's what they're engaged in, then that's what they experience, then they're satisfied. Or if I say this is going to be a romping adventure, it's linear, it's narrative, it's the whole basic thing, your character will have a degree of plot armor by me saying that it's linear and narrative. And it's just, hey, we're going on an adventure, kill the dragons, save the princess, that kind of thing. The other thing I do, other than just be honest and just try to make it about something, whatever that game is, even in improv games, is some systems are better at this than others, but there are systems that have indicators of some variety. In D&D 5e, for example, that would be the class in general. If someone's playing a barbarian, you know probably hitting things in the face is probably a good idea. If someone's playing a rogue, disarming traps or acrobatics is probably a good idea. Having people submit characters ahead of time is what I normally like to do because that gives me a better idea of how to incorporate them into everything. And different individual systems also have these individual ways of letting you know. In fact, fate revolves around it. That's what an aspect is just like, hey, my character is this. Use this, GM, please. Use this. I am required to because I need those fate points. Compel this thing. So, like, for fate, it's aspects. For D&D, it's classes. You know, a person's class choice might help you understand. In a game like L5R, they have advantages and disadvantages. Any game with disadvantage, if a player takes a disadvantage, that's probably an indication that they want that problem to come up in the game. So I know that was long-winded, but basically just I look for what they're doing, look for what's on their character, and I just try to be honest ahead of time about what the game's about.
I don't think it could be stated enough. The idea that if you're going to run a one-shot, you need to have a clear and concise pitch, a hook, something. I don't care if this is a sandbox game, one-shot, and you're in this setting. It needs to be out there. It needs to be known. You need to be able to tell people, like, hey, this is the game where you're fucking, sorry, you're Men in Black and you're about to hunt down an alien and they're hiding in a factory and they can shape change and they might be anybody. But even with that little bit of a hook, your characters know what to expect. They know not to be, we're playing a Men in Black style game. I could be an alien or who likes to stab people with my tongue and do drugs or something. You know that's not going to fly because you already know that you're going to be a Man in Black who's hunting down someone. You know, or if you're playing D&D, if your stated goal is to kill the dragon, save the princess, you know that you're not going to be playing the drow character who wants to double-cross the party. And if you do, well, you're playing the game wrong, at least for this game.
Which is a very interesting point you bring up, is how does a DM essentially deal with a character, like in the middle of a pitch or anything, like in the character creation process, even in the game, that kind of goes against the pitch or against the idea of the game. So again, back to you, Sam. I know you run a lot of Fate, you run a lot of one-shots. So have you ever encountered a player with a character that kind of went against what the game was supposed to be about, or that kind of made you have to swerve and kind of go impromptu with it to kind of make sure you can keep the game flowing?
No, I haven't had somebody go against the pitch, only because, like Chris said, when you're running a one-shot, the pitch is the hook. The pitch is what's going to bring people in. I think that what's interesting, though, about one-shots and what can be tricky is to bring in those elements of character motivation. But what I want as a game master, and what's easy to do in Fate, is to have the player bring that up. right? Like, I don't necessarily want to have to prompt you because, you know, it's more fun, I think, when the character brings it up. Now, in Fate, it's easy because in Fate, you have your aspects, right? Your trouble aspect, your high concept, whatever. Like, you've built these things, and so, you know, those are things that I can look at as a DM, and mechanically, I'm going to use those. But, like, in 5th edition, for example, especially in a one-shot, if you bring in an aspect of, like, I don't know, like if you're not using your bonds, flaws, and ideals in 5th edition, I think that can be good in one sense, but I think it can be challenging in another. I'm trying to think of swerve. I think that may have happened in actually the Disney 5e one shot that I ran, because the players decided to. Oh, yeah. So it did, actually. So I had to improvise in this case. What happened was they decided that they were going to rest, and I had no intention of letting them rest because I didn't want that to happen. But because they took a whole 8-hour rest. One of the parts of the storyline was that there was an army massing on the border and getting ready to invade. Well, they could do a friggin' 8-hour rest. So now I'm like, oh great. So now the army's invading. I had to swerve. I had to do that. But it worked out in the end. And so it was fun. But I think what I would say is for any DMs out there, in terms of prepping, if it's a one-shot, make sure that your players are incorporating those aspects of their characters. But if it's a 3 or 4 hour one-shot, you may not be able to bring everything in. But in a campaign, it's my belief that you should be building the campaign around those elements, not around a hook that the characters then join. That's the way I like to do it. So, that's my piece. So hopefully that was helpful.
I personally think it's a balancing act when it comes to finding whether the characters, whether you want to build it around the characters or around the hook itself. Because I've had both happen. I've had an instance where I pitched a game, and it was, you're gonna be. Do you remember the pitch for Horrible Night, Strider?
Yeah, you were basically saying you were going to be Knights Templar and things of that nature for the game.
We were religious people of some sort.
That was it. Yeah, that was it. That was the whole pitch. It was you were religious folk of some kind, and that was pretty on rails. Like to be perfectly honest, I consider myself fairly good at making my games not railroady, but still have a very clear and defined path. But that succeeded because I think the characters worked, and the hook played to what the game was going to be. I think that a sandboxy one-shot, personally, is not something I'm good at, but if I was going to go that route, I would need... I would still put a hook down that gives me an idea to focus the game, because a DM of a one-shot has the responsibility of ensuring that... I think actually David Daniel Ducker asked a question about this in the OSG recently. Is it the responsibility of a GM to complete a one-shot in the time allotted? And I didn't really pay attention to the discussion, but I thought personally, yes. It's, when I run a game, I want there to be a conclusion the same night that I start the game. So even if there's even if it's a sandbox game, there's got to be some degree of direction, and I think the hook is how you focus.
That's a good point you bring up right there, about kind of bringing the closure to the game. So my question I'd like to pose to everybody right now is, do you guys ever kind of prepare to kind of end the game on time? Like, do you ever kind of set a time and you're like, if they're not at X place by X time, I move them to X place by X time? Or how exactly do you guys go about making sure that you do find closure in your games?
Yeah, I
Oh,
definitely.
good.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I definitely do that. So, Marquise, I think it was actually the first game that you played in that I ran was the Pixie or the Sprite one shot. And that one, I was like, I got a 2 hour time frame. That's it. I'm gonna do that. And so that one, I mean, that was just a straight, railroad, two combat encounters, whatever. And that was fun because, especially Marquise brought in a lot of really kind of twisted elements to his character that made that game interesting. But I bring that up because most of my one shots go too long. Or I should say, I I have a 3 hour time frame, and I realize I need 4 hours, and that's been pretty consistent. I had that happen with my Diablo game. I had that happen with the Fate game that I ran for Marquise and James Carney. I had a lot more planned for that. So I think that would be an interesting question to to kind of bring up is, okay, do you plan that and does it work? Are you able to stick within your time frame?
Yeah, the only thing I was gonna say on the subject was that the first game that I started, I struggled and flopped so hard on pacing my game. I realized about 30 minutes in, basically to my allotted time frame, that I was nowhere near where I needed to be, and I flubbed completely by forcing it to speed up. My personal experience, my players were really dissatisfied with that decision, and that was kind of just a new DM mistake. Um, I kind of really dropped the ball on that one. So I kind of think that being able to have confidence that you can improv almost a completely different outcome than you originally intended is almost kind of an important thing to be okay with, that what you had planned out is going to change, and that's okay.
Well, for myself, I actually do demos at conventions, so I am usually given a specific allotted time. So, for example, this year I have 6 hours to get one players used to the new game system they never played before, get them oriented to their character sheets, run them through the adventure, and then have them beat the game. And then basically, I feel that I have to do that so they come away with the best experience to potentially add them to, for myself, Palladium books and games like that there, to that community that I want more people to be playing it. So I almost have to make sure I can get it done.
And I kind of have a similar experience because when I first started DMing, I would usually give myself maybe I thought it was going to be a 2 to 3 hour time limit, right, when I was running my games and everything. And as I discovered, I actually, as a youngish DM and as someone with a very ambitious kind of imagination and mindset, my games would often just go too long, far past I wasn't preparing properly. And it kind of made me realize that you do need to stick to your adventure and everything. And when you get to the end point, you do generally need to kind of speed up a little bit there because your players essentially sign up for the 3 hours, right? They want to be in and done for 3 hours because of their own schedules or their own needs and everything. So that being said, I feel like it's something that a lot of DMs do struggle with, especially newer DMs. But I feel like in doing that, you can also kind of lose a bit of the game, if that makes sense. And I know, for example, it's kind of throwing it back to Joshua Duncan Kirk real quick, as someone who runs a bunch of campaigns and everything. Josh, how would you say that kind of differs between kind of doing that for a one shot and trying to ensure that that happens, as compared to like a campaign, for example, if that question makes sense?
Yeah, so yeah, no, it makes total sense, and I struggled really bad with one shots and the timing when I first started, which I'm now seeing is a very common thread. And actually, Chepe gave me the best advice. I don't know whether he remembers this conversation, but he basically told me take all the ideas that you have for your one shot and then cut them in half. and take half of the ideas and the ones that are the most important and stick with those. And I sort of took that to heart, and then I kept the other ideas that I wanted to have in there, but sort of set them on a side burner type deal that allowed me to throw them in if I could see that time was going to allow for it, but that I was prepared to, have a start and conclusion that I had originally intended within the given time frame. And keeping that in mind, it's really helped me stick to that sort of 3 hour time slot. Because yeah, I was going into like 4 and 5 hour sessions at first, but with the campaign, I mean, if it's just an open-ended, we're gonna play until this story arc's done kind of thing, it's you just have so much freedom, and you can get so in depth with so many things. And I find that those are the situations where I find myself being a lot more descriptive because I want to, really sort of flesh out the world and, make sure that people feel like they're part of a living thing as opposed to just all right, we're all going to live this story together in the next 3 hours, and then we're going to go, back about our separate ways. So yeah, I mean, a huge difference for me, and I find that I actually have to do a lot more prep for one shots than I have to do for campaigns. Campaigns just seem to, at least for me, flow a lot more naturally, whereas I have to really sort of plan things out for a one shot.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I would say that one shot. I would think probably most people would agree that one shots take a lot more work because you have to create more of the story by yourself as the DM, and you have to really plan the pacing. And so I think that what I've found is that if you're doing like a 3 hour one shot, you pretty much need, I would say, depending on how good you are and how you can work it out, I wouldn't go more than 3 scenes. Have 3 scenes planned out, beginning, middle, end. Have a good idea of what you want to accomplish in those scenes, but keep it fairly loose. And a lot of the time they're going to be formulaic, so it's going to be small fight in the beginning to kind of get the characters used to the world. Then you'll have some kind of discovery or some kind of important event in the middle, and then the boss fight at the end is sort of the typical way that it goes, I think. But what I think with a campaign, like Josh said, you can go off of what the players want to do. You can spend whole sessions, developing background and whatever with them. But what I would wonder, and what I would like to ask everyone, if it's all right, is what do you guys do when you have your encounter running really well, but a player or a couple of players who are excellent role players who really get into their characters in a one-shot start going in that direction? Because for me, at that point, I'll be like, I don't care what I had planned. Like if they're, if they've got something cool going on and there's some good interplay and it's interesting, I'm gonna go with that. So have you guys experienced that? And like what happens? What do you guys do if that happens?
So I've actually had this, I won't say problem, I've had this situation kind of pop up before in my games where the players either basically go complete left field or during the encounter things just completely go south. It actually happened in the game that you were in, Sam, the Snake Cola game, where basically you guys wanted to kind of turn around and basically start World War III going on in my setting. So that being said, like when I have players who kind of go to the left when I expect them to go to the right, or when I have players who kind of do something that might be either unfeasible in my mind originally, or something like that, I completely go and I begin to impromptu it, and I try to make sure it has consistently, kind of what Chepe said earlier, with everything else. I want to keep inner consistency with the world. I will never say flat out no to a player, but when I do give a player something that they ask for that doesn't really properly work, there will usually be consequences attached to it, if that makes sense. Like kind of again, like Chepe said, if you go and you steal this thing or you leave this gun here, next thing you know, you got these guards coming after you, or you have other consequences that you got to face, which I think is something that Chepe could actually probably elaborate on a bit better than I could. Yeah?
No.
Um, I can like help Brother Chepe and just like take over the question at this point. You're welcome, Chepe. So, I've actually had this happen in game. I was doing a zombie game called Dead Rain, and I had Andrew and Posey and Nelson all in the game, and they decided had this whole thing set up, and they decided that they were going to kill their sergeant off in the game. They just like did everything humanly possible to make this a chuckle event. And I'm like, okay, fine. And I rolled with it. And then they decided they were going to go upstairs. And halfway during the game, they decided they wanted to smoke cannabis. And I rolled with that and proceeded to give out penalties accordingly. And yeah, I just adapted to the situation and just improv the whole thing over. So yeah. So at that point, the game went pretty well. Everybody enjoyed it. I didn't tell them they couldn't do anything. And yeah, by the end of the story, Posey rolled a crit one twice and blew up with a grenade launcher. Andrew got sucked down the mine shaft and got eaten alive, and Nelson had a mental breakdown and has PTS from the zombie infestation. It was a good game. Nothing went like I planned, but it was still good.
Yeah, speaking of things kind of not going as planned, I kind of had an interesting question to pose, and that's, think back to like when you guys first DM'd your first couple games, and the mistakes that you made and realized that you made, and I'd like you guys to talk about them and kind of just as an advice point of view, kind of tell people how you went about fixing your own mistakes as you went.
I broke the golden rule of writing, show don't tell, and that was kind of my first game in the one-shot group. I was unused to the format of being able to resolve everything at once, because my method of all plots in all of my games is the long game and the long mystery. So, dribble a few clues here, a few, hints there, foreshadow, imply, never state outright. And I was a little too subtle for my first one shot. Like and it was really esoteric what I was doing. And so at the very end, I had to have an NPC basically explain absolutely everything. And so since then, I've basically been like, okay, I got to make sure that I establish everything that needs to be established, and I would like to think that I've fixed it. The game I am most proud of that had the best response was when I was making a conscious effort to make sure that everything was foreshadowed in advance, even if it wasn't a lot. So everyone was like on the same page, because otherwise you just end up like isolating your players or alienating your players. So.
Cool. Who else? Who else wants to confess the sins of their early days?
I will, I guess, if that's all right. For me, so it's funny, the first system I played was actually Vampire the Masquerade, but I'm trying to remember if that was the first system I ran. I don't think it was. I actually think the first system I ran was D&D 3.0 and then 3.5. And my biggest mistake, as I would call it, was being too worried about the rules and the mechanics, and really sticking to that. And I think that that's very common for new DMs, especially when you have crunch-heavy systems. You really try to do that. And so what ended up happening with me is I think that the story suffered because of that. And I also didn't know at the time that, which is weird because I had played World of Darkness, but I didn't realize that like the characters should have that kind of backstory and should have that. Like I was doing all that with my NPCs and whatever, but I didn't know how to get that out of my players. And So I've gone completely the opposite now. Which, if any of you guys saw the crazy post I put up in the OSG, I'm like, now I want to run a game where it's totally immersive and no stats and no dice rolling. Just as a one shot. But my advice would be, don't worry about the rules. And I'll say that all the time, because for me, I'm always I'm always about the immersion and the story and the characters kind of having fun together. So don't ever let the rules get in the way, or the mechanics get in the way. But I think that it's important to let your players know that ahead of time, because certain players are very I don't know the right word. I don't want to say rules lawyers, but they don't thrive on the rules, but they depend on them, and they almost don't know necessarily how to thrive in a game that isn't sticking closely to the rules. So yeah, that's my I guess that's my DM confession, so to speak.
Awesome.
I think I actually kind of did the opposite of what Sam's saying here when I first started, running my first few games. Because what I did, right, is I made the mistake, or I consider it a mistake, where I would make a story for the one shot, right, and I would put the players in the story, but things were essentially scripted. They'd go from place A to place B to place C, and they'd play through all these things, but they weren't really making the story themselves. They were just basically like characters in my story, if that makes sense. And since then, I've changed it up. I've changed it a lot, kind of departed from that, but basically it's giving them an end goal and letting the players make the story to get to that end goal. But definitely when I first started, I was basically, I wasn't just railroading. I was essentially like writing a short story, and these were my characters in the short story, which I feel didn't satisfy the players and didn't really even satisfy myself really when I was running those games back in my my infant days. So that being said, it was actually playing with a number of GMs, playing with Chepe, playing with Lumi, and even playing with other new players like Sam and playing with Josh and playing with Lumi, that I actually learned how to basically kind of depart from this and kind of how to essentially let the characters make the story themselves and not feeling the need or the desire to make the story for them, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. Chepe, how about you? Tell us about your some GM confessions, as Sam put it, because I liked that.
Everything. It's, there was a game. It was actually an introduction game for helping people get into 5e. Basically, someone had to leave, and I really couldn't think of any other way to get the character, because it was right in the middle of combat. So the only thing that I could think of for the character was to just be torn in twain right in the middle of it. They seemed quite bummed by that fact. Especially earlier on, I guess I had a harder time of trying to always know the sensitivities of some players. It was harder to pick up on them, and I've probably pushed some buttons accidentally as a result. Some people who thought they had plot armor that didn't, things like that.
Just because I feel like sharing this moment right after his confession, the first thing in the side chat that happened when I asked Chepe, Sam said, "I bet his confession is he used to run really normal games." But moving on, Joshua, let's hear from you.
So man, what haven't I done? So like I cut my teeth on 3.5 and came to that from second edition D&D, and that was like, I started role playing, but we were super young and in like middle school, and there were no rules. We just sort of did whatever we wanted to do at that point. So 3.5 was the first time, or third edition was really the first time that I was going to like learn the rules, and it was so rules heavy. I feel like I kind of went the same way that that Sam did is I was just it was about the rules, you know, more so than it was about anything else. And you know, and you know, I was trying to put all of this effort into backstories for stuff in the world and that sort of stuff, but you know, it was the same way. I could never get it out of my players, and it was because I was focusing so much on the rules that, I mean, it was not advantageous for them to spend any time on fluff. You know, it was way more worth their time to sit there and analyze, oh, what feat should I take next, or where should I put this next skill point, and yada yada yada. And I basically ended up with a bunch of players that were already kind of, you know, had power game leanings, and I feel like I possibly made them even worse, and I, you know, maybe ruined them as role players. I don't know. Hopefully not. But yeah, that's probably my biggest mistake, and I have totally broken the cardinal rule of show don't tell, you know, a billion times. And yeah, that's something that honestly I still struggle with. There's just certain times, especially if you're playing something like Dungeons and Dragons, where you've got, let's say, a monster that has a fear effect, and you know that a player has failed their save. Well, how do you describe that to make the player run away from this fight at that point, you know, without just telling them you're afraid? And so that's something that I would still like to be able to do, but yeah, I definitely still struggle with. So yeah, those are probably my two biggest things is learning to let go of the rules in lieu of having fun, and getting better about describing rather than just telling.
Well, and Josh, to that point, I would actually almost say that's the tactic that I like to use, where I say, well, you tell me what happens. Because you have to be careful, because certain players won't like that. Certain players won't do well with that. But I'm still going to lob that out there and see how they, you know, see what they do, because I really enjoy saying, okay, this effect just happened, especially if it's a fear effect, right? I'm like, you know, this happened, and I might even tell them mechanically, this is what happened. Now I want you to describe what that is like for your character. And most of the time, you're going to get something way better than if you try to describe it yourself, because they obviously know their character better, so, you know, than you do. And so that I might try that. That could be, you know, again, depending on the player, that might be the way to handle that.
That actually sounds like really sound advice. Thank you.
Yeah, DM Tavern, uniting the people.
That being said, Juve, you've been DMing a lot longer than I have, and you played a lot more games than I have. So, do you have any of your own crazy old mistakes that you've made in the past, Juve?
I wouldn't say I've been playing longer than you, to be honest. I just had the books longer and no friends to play with, so I wound up studying more than anybody else. I know that when I first did my first demo at Oricon last year, I scheduled it around a 4-hour period, and I did not do proper time management, especially if you're doing stuff at conventions. You gotta have your time management down as key. And the second thing is, I'm used to also helping with the con as well. So I kind of like burnt myself out by day 2. Like, I had people that they felt that the game was rushed, especially with a complex system like Palladium. They didn't get all the nuances as well. So that was mistake number 1. And then I was also trying to get everything else done. So by the time I got to Sunday, I had to cancel my last game because I just was like physically and like mentally done and exhausted. So this year I'm strictly focusing on just doing 6 hours of gaming and make sure that the gamer get the experience that they should get and enjoyment they need to get out of the game, and that's basically it. So for me, it's focusing on time management and not overstimulating yourself, which is something I normally wind up doing.
Which I know with the recent Brigade Con, we actually saw that problem happening a lot, even when myself, Chepe had that issue, I know a few other DMs too. But we have a new face in here real quick, so Mr. Jeremy, my good man, or Speed as you want to be called. So back when you started GMing games and whatnot, did you make any kind of like mistakes or things that you've improved on since then, or kind of like how has your GMing kind of changed in like terms of preparations and whatnot since you first started? What did you improve on?
Honestly, I'm still new to GMing, so I'm trying to make my improvements. One issue that I had at first was I guess I always felt um, pressured for time, so I kind of gave short descriptions of stuff, whereas I knew what was going on, and so I kind of had the feeling the players knew because I knew, not giving the full description. Um, and that was really my biggest issue that I feel like I'm still working on. But what really helped was listening to other podcasts and listening to games being played and hearing people give full and detailed explanations of really everything.
Which, that makes a lot of sense and everything. So kind of go along with that, listening to the game, watching games to improve everything. Kind of like when I was first joining the OSG and I was watching games and everything, one of the things I took notes most on, kind of going with everything else here, was the pacing of the game. Kind of like how Sam said earlier with the three-act structure. I know it varies a lot from one-shots to campaigns. So that being said, Lumi, as you're one who runs both one-shots and campaigns, how would you say you go about pacing both the different types of games, and kind of how does the pacing change depending on the type of game?
I shoot from the hip when it comes to that. I was the one thing I actually did that I never actually had to run into was every single game, every single one shot have all been like around the same amount of time, so I've kind of hit my wheelhouse there. I kind of approach every single campaign, one shot, like every campaign session, every one such shot session, like a self-contained thing. There should be a little bit of roleplay. If there's an encounter, include the encounter. Now, generally I like an encounter of some kind. Not that I don't love role-playing, but you want to break it up just a bit. And that's how you do it. That's what, honestly, in this day and age, that's what the encounters are for. It would be really boring if you were to just have an entire session that is wall-to-wall, non-stop combat with no interaction, no real thinking beyond, okay, what spells do I have left? Go do that. But at the same time, people get tired out if you do a full session of complete roleplay. Now, not to say I haven't done it. I would say that if you the best advice I can offer for pacing is find out, remember what games you played as a player, why they were, and if they were paced well, remember why they were paced well, and just try and mimic it. Imitation is more than just flattery as a DM. It's just how you evolve. You imitate, you get your style. That's my recommendation. Is just find out what worked for you and try and run the game that you would want to run. And it works in a lot of ways, I think. And I'm babbling now, so next.
So finding the game you want to run, I see, is very important. Josh, you've also did campaigns and one-shots. Do you agree with what Lumi's saying? Do you have anything new yourself to add to it, or what do you think about the matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think that pacing is, you just sort of have to gauge your players, but definitely the way you pace a one-shot is very different than the way, or at least for me, is very different than the way that you pace a campaign. To me, campaigns, there are a lot of different ways to sort of inject more energy into your game with a campaign. I feel like it could be, a new object that they discover. It could be something as small as a new room that can be explored, or a new area, a new NPC. can provide a huge amount of energy, whereas with a one shot where you've got an end goal in mind, you're sort of, at least to me, I feel more limited with the kind of things that I can introduce. So it's really just, to me, it's come down to watching the clock and being prepared to possibly have is kind of like I think Sam said earlier, and Chelsea, be prepared to have a different outcome maybe than you originally intended if that's the way that the game's going, and if it fits.
Which also makes a sense. So, kind of just continuing down the line here, the third person I know who also has a lot of one-shots and campaigns is Chepe. So, Chepe, kind of go on what Lumi said about finding the game and what Josh said about making it fit. Do you have any kind of advice for people, like when it comes to pacing for campaigns versus one-shots and the differences in between both of these games?
So it varies greatly depending on what time hour slot you're going for. Generally, I pace things similar simply because I like to run 3-hour games anyway, 3 to 4 hours, my 3 hours, and then sometimes 3 to 4 hours on occasion. The advice would be that I told Josh like a long time ago apparently, and I've completely forgot about it until now. Was all the ideas you have, all the things you want to do that you've prepared, whatever prep you have, cut it in half and have a bulk, a bare minimum, similar to what Sam said earlier with 3C, and then have optional stuff that could make sense to be plugged in for the one shot. For one shots, especially, you're going to have to do two things, right? You're either going to have to force the situation, play your hand, or cut back on content, or do some skipping behind the scenes simply for the purpose of making sure it goes within the time limit. Campaigns are different. Anything that happens, you can give. You can always do it next session. So campaign pacing is a little bit different. The job of a DM with campaign pacing is more about just making sure it doesn't drag on to the point where people completely are disillusioned. The point of a one-shot is to confine within the time. Pacing is more in that time more than anything else. It's like running a game in a lot of ways. And the two best ways that I've always said is cut it in half, keep a lot of the stuff optional, and if it can be taken out or plugged in to meet if you want to give players more freedom. Or if you're going to be that way and you want to cut, the other option you have is to take away agency from the players temporarily by doing montages, scene cuts, saying, look, we're going to have to move on from here. And sometimes that is necessary. But other times you might have a one-shot where people are treating it like a campaign. If you're okay with it ending preemptively and not having a conclusion, because sometimes that is okay. For some groups, for some players, and for some, okay to not have a conclusion and just say, we role-played for 2 or 3 hours, we've meet the time slot, we can't do a 2-off or 3-off, so it's going to have to end here. Other times it's not. Generally speaking, though, one-shots, you're going to have to cut back a lot of content and make it a lot of optional for the one-shot, and then for a campaign, it's more about light hand in order to make sure the interest is constantly refreshed. So, I think. And Juve's going to put it in like 2 words.
Well, the way I do the pacing of gaming is I'm a big movie buff, so I break it down into, I do it either like a TV series, so I pretty much space out where there's like, you complete the goal that you want for that in particular session, and then you have the big season finale or sweet. And then for a one shot, I treat it like a movie. So I pretty much have the beginning opening sequence, the interaction, the mini boss, the main boss, and that's usually game. So it wasn't 2 words, Jeff. It was like a couple Of course.
So that kind of makes a lot of sense there, Juve, with the whole, mini boss, end boss in the game and everything. So, Sam, I know earlier that you mentioned talking about the three acts and everything. So, in terms of pacing, would you mind elaborating on that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, basically, what I've learned to do now is to plan maybe one or two major things and be able to improv the rest of it. Because if you have really good players, or you have players that are really into role playing and whatever, they're going to, just by adding descriptions to their combat and to really thinking creatively, they're going to slow the game down. Which is a good, not slow the game down, I don't want to say that. They're going to possibly mess with your timing. But I think that's a good thing. So, yeah, so what I would do, and running Fate, I think, makes this easy, because with Fate, you have the option to, use invokes and compels and whatever to really move things along, and the whole point is action-based. But what I would say is, especially for a one-shot, you need to know what the main goal is, right? So if the main goal is you need to defeat this enemy, really that's the only thing you need to do. You can basically BS the entire session as long as you get that main goal in there, right? And so lately, that's what I've been trying to do in terms of pacing. Is I'll say, okay, I want to have an intro scene. In a one-shot, the intro scene is going to include allowing the players to introduce themselves, introduce their characters, plug their channels, whatever. And then depending on the game, I might also have them do, a little bit of an intro. And then, we'll move into, then I do the little narration, the setup, and then we're going, right? And then I usually have one specific scene that I have laid out that's going to happen, whether that is a small fight, whether that is, exploration, whether that's encouraging, a certain role-playing encounter, and then, we do our thing, and then you get to the end. And the end is whatever it is, if it's a boss fight or whatever. So for one-shots, my advice is prep only a few major things that you want to have happen, and let the rest of it happen organically. And for campaigns, I would say, really, maybe the opposite. Let things go. Let things, just let things progress. Have, again, that big framework, and let your players know kind of where you want things to go, but allow them to really kind of play their characters out and introduce new elements, which may end up completely changing your plan altogether.
So I have a question, and really it's kind of for everybody here, kind of building off what Sam just said. When he was talking about the one-shots and letting things go organically, let's say you guys have been, you've been going impromptu with it, you've been keeping up with it, and then about halfway through the one-shot, one character or even two characters either have to drop out, or their characters even more extreme, they just kind of die right there. How exactly do you guys handle character death in the middle of a one-shot and kind of progressing from there and planning to get to the end point of the one-shot after something like that has happened?
Well, I don't think any death of a character should feel meaningless. So any quick fix resurrection, I think, unless they're high enough level to do it themselves, and that's something that you allow in your world, that's kind of okay, but I feel as though a character death of any kind, even in a one-shot, should have a major effect and ripple on the entire encounter and party as a whole.
I would agree, and I think that actually brings up a good question, because I know that I have this problem sometimes in that I don't want to throw anything too hard at the party too early. For that reason, because I'm nervous that, okay, if they die early, where are we going to go? Lately, though, I think that, especially in a one-shot, if you understand that it's going to be hard and you understand that there is an end goal in mind, I'm going to let the players do what they do. And if they do something that leads to their death, early in the game, that's fine. And then you go off that. And like Chelsea said, I think that is crucial that the other players take up that death and they role play that and they role play that reaction. Because I think that if you don't do that, because you're right, like that death should be meaningful. And that could be challenging in a one-shot if it's sort of just like you guys meet in a tavern, you're part of the, Mercenaries Guild, and you've gone on this adventure. But even with that, a group of solid role players is going to be able to, grab that ball and run with it. So yeah, so I would say definitely, it can be difficult when they die early in the adventure.
Yeah, I'm gonna, I knew inevitably it was gonna happen again, but I'm gonna have to bring up the Snake Colors game again. Because even though those deaths happened at the end of that one shot, that is kind of on-running because of the way Stereotypical Strider's games run, they're kind of almost all intertwining, and I can kind of take my character and keep going. My character being the last one standing, and losing Caracella's character the way we did, where I had fully healed him and he drops dead in front of my eyes. I mean, those four characters were characters that had basically met that day and were like, we're gonna go on an adventure. Somehow in that game, this magical mental connection was forged so quickly. It was actually really amazing. I talk about it to this day. What's the word for it? It's something I can't get over because I haven't had a game like it since, and never before that, where basically, strangers come in to play a game together and it just works. And the death of your character, Sam, and the death of Caracella, and our other party member, they were so impactful in those moments that they resonated with that character in every one shot she played in after that. There's a timeline for that character at this point, of her goals, of basically she wanted to bring you guys back. She wanted to become strong enough as an Oracle, Strider's homebrew, to bring you guys back to life. And that's been her goal ever since. And it's been what's driving her in every one-shot sense. So I guess that's kind of what I mean by a death should mean something.
And I see what you guys are saying with, the character death should be impactful mentally, the story and everything, but let's say it happens before the end of the game and the character dies and it is impactful and everything, and then we just have the player kind of sitting there. And I kind of want to ask Juve this question specifically, because I know Juve has been in a lot of games at demos and everything. I'm not sure if he's had character death or not, and then really anyone can jump in on too. But let's say a character dies in the middle of the session, you make it impactful and everything, but then what do we do with that player? Like if it's in a con, does the player just sit there and wait? Or how exactly do we move forward from that point with that player?
Well, I normally give a couple of options. Since I do a lot of improv, I wind up either A, give them the option that they can leave out, B, since I have pre-gens, I will give them another character and find a way to weave that character into the current story, and then C, to see what their general personality types is. Because when you're at a con, you really don't know what type of person you're dealing with. You might have someone that's super sensitive about the fact they got killed off in a demo, or you might come across somebody that's like, okay, it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, let's roll with this and continue, especially if they're definitely engaged in what you're doing. So it's basically gauge what your player doing and find out what they personally would like to do. If they want to leave, I usually give them their prize support for being at the game. Tell them to keep the character sheet. They can use it at another future event, and that's it. Or if they say they want to stay, I just hand them another character sheet, continue the story, and find a way to have them be brought in.
Which makes a lot of sense for the one shots and everything. So going off of that, Josh, since you're running a long-standing campaign right now and everything, Josh, when you have a player die before the end of the session, or really even halfway through the campaign, and let's say this character's been built up a lot, right? He has all kinds of attachments to other characters, to the setting and everything. How do you handle it, Josh? How do you prepare for it for when that character dies?
So this is that moment where I tell you that I'm way too nice of a GM, and I've literally never had a character die in one of my games. So that's never a thing that I've actually had to prepare for. So yeah, that's actually something I would love to hear about how other people have handled.
So, has anyone here had a campaign type game, maybe Chepe perhaps, where you've had a character die in the middle of the campaign or before the campaign actually ended?
Most of my campaigns end too early. Like, I guess that would be my big GM confession, right? I've never had a campaign that actually goes to 10 sessions. Like, like the new era campaigns, you even know that. Like, I've always wanted that, but typically someone moves, like someone's grandma gets struck by lightning, like some weird something happens, and I can't end up finishing a campaign. I've never had someone die in a campaign preemptively. I've never had a campaign that was long enough to do that. Um, but uh, I've had plenty of people die in horrible ways in one shots before the one shot ended. If that counts, I mean, like I've counted, and I've had people do horrible things that are worse than death. I've counted like some of the weird things that happen just because players put themselves in situations, and I just let them. Like last night, we had a character who died giving themselves up for another party member as they were running away because they got into a facility they probably shouldn't have been in, at least not just by the two of them.
I held to my
Uh,
character's whims, okay? I'm holding to my guns.
I've had an entire party turned into lycanthropes. I've had total party lycanthropy. I've had a party that ended up being basically made drones for a harem of ice giants. They were ended an ice giant rape. I've had people who have been lost in the middle of nowhere, and that's the end of their one shot. I believe Strider was in that one where you guys ended up alone on the mountaintop, completely scarred, and your face is and your skin is completely painted black because of the teleportation device that you went through. Um, and I've had people who ended up getting tortured. I've had people who ended up falling, and then that was like they critically injured themselves by tripping. Like I don't know. I'm not as like I switch between simulation and narrativism, but I'm someone who likes to let things happen as a GM. And when you let people do things, typically they just put themselves in horrible situations, or when they are in a horrible situation, you just let them handle it however they want. Sometimes horrible things happen.
Which is very
Uh,
true, and as a GM, kind of building off what Chepe's saying right there about the whole, sometimes horrible things do happen. You can't prepare for everything the players are going to get into. Kind of also to help you out, as someone who's run a campaign before, and I've had characters die on me, in the middle of the campaign, before the campaign ends and everything. Generally, when that happens, right, you let the characters do what they want to. I always try to make sure the character at least fulfills at least something that they wanted to originally right before the character dies. Because my big thing is when a character dies, or when a character faces any obstacle, right? I want it to actually mean something for the character. It has to be very difficult as a result, and it has to be a very real chance of failure. And more than often than not, I've had total party wipes. I've had people dying for me on me in the middle of campaigns and everything. So when that happens, as long as the player, in my opinion, and in the player's opinion, is able to get even a little bit of what their character is out of it, and if they're able to, I guess, fully realize the depth of what they were doing and the obstacle they were trying to overcome and everything, then generally it's okay for them to make the new character and continue with the world if that makes sense. Because you die in the middle of the campaign, and you lose everything you've been building up for, you can still kind of continue that momentum into the next character, and you can kind of take what happened with that character's death and everything, and apply it to your next character, even narratively, by seeing the obstacle that they themselves failed to overcome, if that makes sense, Josh. But basically, you had the character die and everything, but since you want the world to be consistent, you want the players to affect the world, how that character died will probably end up being either well known, or that character that they're remaking to replace that character can kind of discover, how that character died on their own, and kind of use it to apply to the next character, if that makes sense, Josh.
Yeah, no, yeah, it totally does, and that's good advice, and that's I guess that's another like GM faux pas of mine is I've never been willing to like go. I've had it on the precipice before. I've just never gone through with it, and I feel like it should just be something that I should let happen. Anyways,
Well,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry. Not necessarily. Like, if the game is inherently linear and it's well, it's so narrative to the point where it's assumed that these are like main characters in a book, and they need to finish the story, right? Because it's about them. Then that's not inherently a bad thing either. Like, when you're getting to the issue of player deaths, it really does come down to what the game was sold to be and what was given to the players, whether or not those things were the same thing. If the player is mad because the game is what it says it is, then that just means they didn't listen. They've had their own expectations. They misjudged what the game was to begin with. That's on the player's side, not necessarily the GM's. Um, this particular case comes down to style rather than what's good and what's bad. Some people are more skilled at games where it is so narrative and it's like a beginning, middle, and end, and keeping that structure, and the characters are almost guaranteed to meet the end of it, even though not always unscathed. Um, and other people are more situation oriented and they just want to let the situation be whatever it is. And some people set the bar really high for players and they have to think and they have to do this and they have to do X, Y, and Z in order to just survive. Just it depends on the game, on the group, and what that GM's comfortable with and whether or not the players understand the way the GM is running things. And sorry, I was just saying that it's not necessarily that. Actually, I was called that GM faux pas. I was just
no,
saying
no
that the style that you've done.
well, cool, thank you. I appreciate that.
And Jeremy, I believe you had something to say on the topic.
Yeah, kind of what I had planned for a one shot. Like I said, I'm new, but the one shot that I had planned was for a group of new players, and it went really, really well. And so what I did is I actually had planned for them to die at one point. Some new players, they're getting put in a new game, didn't know what's going on, it's going to happen. So I guess one thing that I thought of is what happens if the players don't is always a question. And so what happens if the players don't win, basically. And so I created a system where the player gets to be possessed, come back to life, then kind of do some role play with the other characters, and then rolling wisdom saves and whatnot with assistance from the players, he can actually come back to life after making, death throws and all kind of stuff. And it allowed me to explain how that worked, along with making the new characters kind of role play a little bit, while bringing him back to life in a one shot. Because to me, in a one shot, you should have a way to deal with that. It's not a campaign. It's a one shot. This is the one time they're going to be playing this world. I guess that's how I take it. I don't know if people with more experience have something to input on that.
Well, I mean, I think that I don't know. My philosophy on sort of character death in general is that I kind of think that it's the player that ultimately kills the character. And what I mean by that is that, at least for me, I don't believe in leaving character death strictly up to the dice. Because to me, there's something really unsatisfying about that. I think that if somebody is in a situation where they roll dice and it's going to result in the death of that character, I'm going to give them the opportunity to say, do you want to die, or let's figure out something else, because not to say that you're not eventually going to die, because if the result is you're trying to climb up the mountain and you slip and you fall, you may not you might not make it, but maybe you fall unconscious at first instead of dead. So that's one thing that I think of. But
To me, I also feel like in campaigns with character death, as a player, I don't expect my character to make it to the end of the campaign. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but I feel like in many cases, character death is one of the most satisfying things that you can have happen as a player, if it's on your terms. So, I don't know. Sometimes that really sucks. But to speak to Chelsea's point, with Christopher Caracella, that dude kills his own character like all the time, but he does it in a great way. So I think it's funny. So he did that in my game. I think he may have even done that in the Snake Color game. I don't know
He
if he
did.
died. I think he let himself die. Yeah.
Yeah, basically, what happened was his patron killed him in that moment, and he made that happen.
Essential, and I see what you're saying, Sam. Where you kind of want you want your character to die in particular, and you only want to really happen for like the narrative story reasons. That being said, as someone who has a reputation for their characters after dying in my games and everything, generally how I begun to think about it is there's two types of players, right? The type of player who wants their character to always succeed at the end, and the type of player who is either okay with or wants their character to die at the end. And I think when kind of preparing for one-shots and preparing for the campaigns and everything, you really have to be mindful of what exactly your players' expectations are about their characters dying, which is why sometimes character death can be a very tricky subject. You'll get those players who, even the slightest thing going wrong with their characters can be a really big issue for them. And then you'll get those players kind of like Caracella who will kill their character come hell or high water by the end of the one shot of the campaign. So that being said, when you guys are kind of going through and setting up for your one shots and your campaigns and everything, do you guys ever create something that you know will kill your characters? Or do you just kind of have things that could potentially do it but probably won't? Like, how exactly do you guys go about kind of setting the bar, like Chepe said, with character obstacles and whatnot?
As a player, a lot of my characters end up dead at the end. Even in really lighthearted games, like the Cypher System game me and Chepe played in on the release night, I've always been perfectly okay with... Huh?
Nothing bad happened. It was a completely happy ending. Bad things never happen in Chepe's games.
Basically, I've always kind of gone into any game that I play in that I am okay if I have to sacrifice myself. I'm not okay with, like, I guess I've always said I'm not okay with meaningless deaths, so if I'm gonna go out, I like to go out in a sacrificing way, and I pulled it last night as well, and I was really happy that Chepe let me pull it, because it went from 2 people dying to just me dying and having a wonderful moment. And, saving my, basically best friend in the game. As far as just dropping dead to a boss fight and, like, that's it, if I'm going to drop dead, I like to have that almost flashing tunnel moment, like memories flashing moment. I feel like if you're going to wrap up with a death, that you should have a moment where you're kind of explaining the last fading thoughts as they die. So that's my take on it personally.
I would just say real quick, I, as a DM, have no problem throwing stuff at the characters that will potentially kill them. For example, one of the campaigns that I ran, the very first thing I had happen to them was, shipwreck. Then they get captured, and then they're going to be sacrificed to a dragon in their first level. So, but I'm going to give them the opportunity to figure that out and get out of there. but I'm also going to give them the opportunity to screw up and not figure that out and die. So I think that, you know, for me, if you have a cool story and you have a good reason for doing what you're doing, I don't think there's anything wrong with that as a DM.
So that being said, just throwing it one more time to Juve, since you run a bunch of con games like you said earlier and everything, do you ever create obstacles, encounters, or events that you are fairly sure will be exceedingly deadly or just normally deadly for your players?
Normally when I do encounters with folk, especially at conventions, um, I want them to actually have an enjoyable experience, and if necessarily, I will let the roles dictate whether or not that person get kills or not. And even when I do one shots or campaigns, I let the roles dictate pretty much what happens to that character. If they critically fail during the middle of a boss fight and crit fail, you know, the consequences are given out accordingly. So I let fate pretty much determine what happens, and I basically narrate from there. I had a situation with Philip Posey in my Dead Ring game where he rolled a natural one. I had him roll it again. He rolled a hit. So he was holding a grenade launcher. So I say you had complete total failure with your weapon, and it basically explodes. And I asked him like how many rounds you had, and he's like it's fully loaded. I'm like, yeah, your blood mist across the room, and you take out half the zombies, which cleared the way. But I turned that death into something, I guess, meaningful. Got pretty much that kind of like cleared the way for Nelson's character to get to the roof. So, I mean, I generally base it upon whether or not what the roll of the dice basically dictates.
Which makes a lot of sense. And I know kind of in the side chat here, which I know our viewers can't see, we were kind of talking about the roll of the dice and how it can sometimes be satisfying or unsatisfying. So just for like any kind of like last words on this topic and everything, is there anyone here of the opinion that when you're rolling the dice and everything, do you guys just let the dice kill the players, or will you intervene to stop the dice from killing the players?
It depends on the situation and whether or not does that actually help out with the overall story that I'm basically improving on. If I feel that it's not helping and I do things to intervene on that, and I do a 3-strike rule, is like 3 times to prevent the situation from happening, and 3 times it completely goes wrong, I just at that point has determined that part of the story needs to be told, and I just let it happen. But it really depends on whether or not does it help progress the story, or will it wind up derailing things overall.
Yeah. Before I move on, does anybody else have anything to say on this subject? Going once. Going twice. Sold. So basically, we had a really good talk tonight. I usually do a game at the end, but we ran the full 2 hours talking, which is great. Anytime you guys want to come back and do this again, I think me and Strider have decided to permanently co-host DM Tavern, which is awesome. So the bold, the beautiful Strider will always be here. Yay. But basically, just to wrap up, I want to kind of go down the line, get you guys' thoughts on basically what we talked about tonight. You can plug anything you want to plug, anything that you have going on, games that you have coming up, anything like that. You have open floor for a couple seconds as I go down the line. So I want to start with Sam. What have you got going on? What do you got to plug? What do you think about tonight's talk? Yada yada.
Wow, thanks. What do I have going on? Geez, too much to handle. So, but it was a really good talk. I think that this was really valuable. I think we had a lot of good insight into these topics, and I think that these things should definitely continue. I really like the format and the sort of the 2-hour time frame. I think it's a good thing for people to view. In terms of what's coming up, I am definitely planning on running a lot more Fate, hopefully, in the new year, and also hopefully I'm going to be getting Numenera here maybe the end of this month. So I'm definitely going to throw up a couple of one-shots in that, and then next year probably definitely start going with that. Might also do some World of Darkness. I got a collaboration project going on, so if anyone's looking into that, let me know. Chalice and Chains, check out the channel. That's my piece.
Awesome, thank you. And just a personal thank you for coming and having the talk with us. Chepe, go.
Chepe, the channel is Fauntrodden, Fauntroddden. Don't ask why the name is the way it is. Just find it if you care for niche things or not. I don't really care. It's either way. There's a ton of good gaming channels out there that you can plug or can be plugged. AG Pickett's one of them. Chalice Chains, obviously. Null Inquisitor, Moonslinger, a bunch of other people. Becky Rose / Dungeon Girl. I forget which channel name she's going by these days. There's a ton of cool people online. You can check them out. There's a lot of community discussion, live games, and some of which are on my channel. There's world-building discussions in the Fall of House Ownwald if you're interested in Game of Thrones style D&D meets Filipino mythology.
Cool. How about you, Jeremy?
I have nothing to plug, really. Not yet. I am working on getting some one-shots together for the one-shot group to host. Basically, what I'm doing is I have 2 home groups, like friends that I play with, one good, one bad. And then I need basically filler stuff, so I was going to plan on having one-shots for. We were talking about having the harder matches where players are more likely going to die. I was actually thinking of having like an arena thing planned for that for a one-shot group. But, that was pretty much it. I'm here for the experience.
Awesome. How about you, Joshua?
So Joshua here for Roll with the Punches. Thanks for having me on tonight. Check out my channel. War of the Gods Season 2, the PvP season, starts this Saturday. So you can just watch a bunch of level 20 super broken D&D 5th edition characters just knock the ever-loving crap out of each other in an attempt to win artifacts of great power for their characters to make decisions about a world that we're building through the course of the game. So that's fun. I've got Threats Unseen, my World of Darkness campaign, which starts in 2 weeks. And last but certainly not least, I have some fun Traveler stuff that will be coming up soon on my channel. So that'll all go up on the OSG, the Tabletop Online role-playing game one-shot group. So definitely go check that out on Facebook. That's where I've met all these fine people and where I have found lots and lots of fun games and friends and all of that good jazz. So thank you guys.
Awesome. Juve, what do you think about tonight? And then, by the way, it was really nice meeting you.
Same here. I think it was awesome. I'm in the process of trying to become more of a better GM. I've read for years copious amounts of role-playing books, but actually hosting and doing games has been new for me since I've been in one shop. I've been in one shop for about a year now. Stuff I'm currently thinking about doing is, since it's October, I've been doing World of Darkness themed games, old school World of Darkness. I'm going to be having a mega game on the 31st covering the entire universe of World of Darkness. I'm probably going to take about 5 to 6 players, and any game line I'm pretty much going to probably let in, and I'm going to craft a story where they all have to work together to accomplish the same common goal. And then there's also a possibility I might do a World War II mega game as well. That one there is going to be very much like another Tarantino film, Glorious Bastards. So it's going to be the player versus the bad guys, which are going to be Nazis, and potentially undertone things with, once again, dealing with xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and stuff like that, but in a very adult and non-provocative way, but to craft the story to motivate my players. I try to do things that a lot of people are either scared to do because they think, well, I might offend someone, but I think that any genre can be covered if done responsibly, one courtesy to your players, and one done responsibly. So I'm pretty much nothing is like off limits to me. So I'll try anything once.
I know you said non-provocative, but you are talking so nerdy to me right now. Like, damn. All right.
It's a gift.
I'm gonna let Stereotypical Strider do his plugs, and then I'm gonna do an outro, and I have a couple things to tell you about what I have coming up soon. So hit it.
So again, I am the bold, the beautiful, Stereotypical Strider. I love the fact that I could co-host this with my beautiful Chelsea over here. It was an immense amount of fun. I love all you guys and all the thoughts that you guys had throughout the conversation. I do run the channel, Stereotypical Strider, where I have live plays and other tutorial videos, everything. That should be coming up pretty soon. I like to plug the OSG and also 2 projects I'm currently working on with many members of the OSG. The first one is for all you GMs out there who watch this video and who basically create your own settings, your own homebrew and everything. I want to run your homebrew settings for you. I want you guys to be able to finally experience what you guys create from a player's own perspective. So that being said, if you guys would find me on Facebook, the name is Marquise Hardis, or even comment down below on this video, I want to be able to work with you guys to be able to run your own settings for you. Another project I'm doing on is these kind of DM taverns and other community workshops. I want to help DMs get better. I want to help players improve and everything. I want to discuss and basically create that community feeling so we can all improve and run the best games that we possibly can for one another. Of course, I want to plug everyone's channel in here. I want to plug everyone's channel overall. Everyone has pretty beautiful games here, all beautiful concepts and all that good stuff and everything. And just once more, thank you, Chelsea, for letting me do this.
Absolutely. It's been a true and honest joy to have you helping me with it. One of the biggest reasons we haven't had more DMs Taverns is because, well, I'm actually a lot more shy than probably people realize. And you kind of bring the extroverted force that I needed. But basically, I wanted to tell you guys that we have a 3rd one-shot of Braemar coming up. It's already full up, but Braemar, as usual, will be a constant on the OSG as I have time to do it. Right now, as kind of it has been for the past 2 months, I am very tightly scheduled due to my husband's work schedule. But I do want to tell you about at the end of the month, I haven't picked a day exactly, I will be doing kind of a Halloween special. It's not Halloween themed, it's just horror themed. I've been working on this setting for the past 2 months. I'm very excited about it. It's going to be Port Noir, so keep a lookout on it. I will post it and it will be first come, first serve. The other thing that I wanted to kind of talk about was the next DM Tavern. It's already plotted out. We're going to be talking about homebrews and how DMs kind of figure out which homebrew to allow in their worlds and whatnot, and if they even should, how to kind of go about making homebrews and just everything homebrews. So that's going to be it for tonight. As always, I thank you guys for giving me your time. It's so rewarding to have so many bright minds come together and discuss things that they're so passionate about. I find a true and honest joy just kind of sitting back and watching you guys go. That's the biggest reason that I do this. But again, thank you, and I hope everybody has a good night, and this is all of us signing off.